The movie begins in the icy waters of the Arctic Circle at the North Pole, where a ship is navigating through frozen seas, breaking the ice as it moves forward. The ship is called Icebreaker, the world's first icebreaker ship of its time. On the deck, the captain, standing with a telescope, is inspecting the surroundings. The captain is a kind and respected man who always stands with his crew in any task. This loyalty has earned him the crew's admiration, and they are even willing to risk their lives for him. On board the ship, there is also a mischievous dog that keeps the crew entertained. After some time, they spot a massive iceberg over 100 meters tall. Despite being close to it, the size of the iceberg isn't fully visible to them. Due to the lack of advanced technology on the ship, it was impossible to turn the ship sharply at a 70-degree angle. The captain suggested navigating the ship to the left of the iceberg. However, the crew didn't fully agree with this idea. The vice captain suggested halting the ship and waiting for the iceberg to drift away. But the captain pointed out that the wind direction was opposite to theirs, which meant the iceberg was drifting toward the ship. Therefore, they needed to pass it before it could get any closer. As planned, they proceeded to navigate past the iceberg, but upon getting closer, they realized its size was much larger than anticipated, and the captain had taken a significant risk. The crew started losing hope of survival. The iceberg also extended deep below the water's surface, making a collision unavoidable. Still, the captain and crew refused to give up. As they neared the iceberg, the captain ordered a 45-degree turn. The ship brushed against the side of the iceberg, causing parts of it to break and fall onto the ship. The captain instructed everyone to move to safety. Though the ship sustained significant damage, including losing its radar system, it managed to escape safely without any major casualties beyond this. However, just when everyone thought they were safe, the mischievous dog, terrified, jumped into the icy waters. Its owner, in an attempt to save it, also jumped in. The captain immediately sent down a ladder to rescue him, but the man, while trying to save the dog, couldn't reach the rope and began to drown. A crew member jumped into the water to rescue him, but could not save the man. However, the dog was saved. Moments later, the man drowned into the endless depths of the sea. His body was retrieved and brought on board, but he was already freezing. The ship sailed away, but the crew was deeply saddened by the man's death. The crew returned inside to assess the damage, only to find that most parts of the ship were still intact, apart from the damaged radar system. Meanwhile, the captain locked himself in a room. The ship's vice captain, Raymond, approached the door and reported the extent of the damage, including the broken radar antenna, which meant they couldn't monitor activities or send messages. Even after hearing this, the captain didn't open the door, and Raymond left. Raymond began to incite the crew against Captain Nikolai, claiming that his poor decision-making had led to the man's death and the damage to the ship. However, a crew member named Bennick dismissed Raymond's claims, stating that Captain Nikolai never made decisions recklessly. Meanwhile, we see Captain Nikolai's family, his wife, Luda, and their son. Luda no longer seemed happy in their marriage and was planning to divorce him. Back on the ship, the authorities sent a message blaming Captain Nikolai's decision-making and removed him from his post. Raymond was appointed acting captain for 3 weeks until a new captain, Shevchenko, would take over. Nikolai handed over the ship to Raymond and prepared to leave. 3 weeks later, Shevchenko arrived via helicopter. As the helicopter approached the ship, Shevchenko asked the pilot what would happen if they crashed in the icy region. The pilot confidently assured him it wouldn't happen, as he had extensive training, then proceeded to ramble, annoying Shevchenko, who tried to relax by listening to music. But neither of them knew the helicopter was about to face trouble. Meanwhile, Captain Nikolai was packing up to leave and bid farewell to the crew. As he headed to the helicopter, its engine caught fire, making an emergency landing impossible. The damaged engine forced Nikolai to stay on the ship, as it was the only way back to the board office. He received new orders to remain on the ship for a few more days. When Shevchenko inspected the ship, he only found problems, and in frustration, he threw a crew member's belongings into the ice. Then, he went to the control room and ordered the ship to move at full speed. Shevchenko's behavior was erratic and made him unpopular among the crew. Meanwhile, Luda informed the authorities that they must help the ship's crew at all costs. Otherwise, everyone on board could die. An official assured her that the ministry was working on a rescue initiative and that as long as Nikolai was on the ship, he could handle any crisis. But Luda remained deeply worried about her husband. Back on the ship, the pilot was trying to repair the helicopter but failed. He met a mute crew member who tried to assist. Meanwhile, the ship got stuck in a thick layer of ice, unable to move forward or backward. Shevchenko convened a meeting with the crew, during which Raymond informed everyone of their predicament and asked for suggestions. One crew member proposed detonating barrels of fuel under the ice to clear the path, but Nikolai objected, stating they didn't know how thick the ice was, making it a dangerous option. Shevchenko dismissed Nikolai from the meeting, blaming him for the ship's broken antenna and the current predicament. Later that night, the crew gathered to watch a movie for some enjoyment, but the ship's electricity suddenly cut out. Shevchenko announced that the ministry was sending a rescue team, but until then, they needed to conserve electricity and ration their food. This announcement angered the crew. Benek confronted Raymond, accusing him of betraying Nikolai, which had worsened their situation. Benek called Shevchenko a parasite, consuming the crew's morale. Frustrated, he walked away. Meanwhile, Luda visited the ministry's office, demanding to contact her husband. She and other relatives of the crew were denied contact due to orders from higher authorities. Suddenly, Luda felt dizzy, prompting the office staff to take her to the hospital. Over there, Nikolai takes a flare gun and ventures out from the ship in search of something. Along the way, the pilot sees him but assures Nikolai that he wants to help and won't report his actions. Nikolai then moves away from the ship towards the icy landscape, where he finds the same ruby cup that Shevchenko had thrown far away earlier. However, Nikolai suddenly slips and falls into a crevice. He struggles to climb out but fails. As he tries to escape, a wild animal approaches, intending to attack him. To save himself, Nikolai fires the flare gun into the sky, which is noticed by the same pilot who had promised to help him earlier. The crew, led by the pilot, sets out to search for Nikolai and successfully rescues him from the crevice unharmed. Nikolai then shows the ruby cup to Shevchenko, stating that the iceberg is following them because Shevchenko had thrown the cup far from the ship, yet it mysteriously returned to them. This indicated that the iceberg's movement was linked to the ruby cup. That night, the entire crew danced and sang loudly to entertain themselves, but this behavior greatly irritated Shevchenko. In a fit of rage, he broke the pilot's guitar and ordered everyone to clean the ice off the ship. Nikolai confronts Shevchenko, telling him that breaking the guitar and mistreating the crew was unnecessary. Shevchenko, however, walks away without a word after hearing Nikolai criticize the ministry. Later, the doctor also advises Shevchenko to be more compassionate with the crew to earn their respect, reminding him that he has been a good friend in the past. The doctor then shares a wish. If he dies, he wants his body to be laid to rest in the water for peace. Shevchenko dismisses this sentiment and rudely questions why the doctor is saying such emotional things now. Meanwhile, as the iceberg inches closer, the ice surrounding the ship begins to break and seep into its lower compartments, causing severe flooding. This damage ruins most of their food supplies, leaving them with limited drinking water. The crew manages to seal off the affected parts of the ship to stop further flooding. In the midst of this chaos, Nikolai locks himself in the radio room without informing anyone. When the crew attempts to open the door, Nikolai warns them that he will broadcast to the world their dire situation and hold the ministry responsible. However, in the end, he does not send out any message. By this time, the crew had been stranded for over 2 months, and their food and water were running out. Unbeknownst to them, a rescue team had already been dispatched, which included Nikolai's wife, Luda. One of the men, who was overly interfering in Luda's life, questions her about their relationship. Luda firmly tells him that she likes someone else and is divorcing Nikolai. The next day, the crew hoped for a rescue ship so they could enjoy a proper meal again. However, the iceberg was slowly but surely advancing toward them. Early the following morning, Shevchenko wakes up and sees the pilot attempting to flee the ship. The crew catches the pilot and interrogates him, learning that he wanted to escape because he disliked Shevchenko's leadership. In his anger, the pilot starts fighting with the crew and accidentally activates a button on the helicopter, fixing it. This unexpected discovery cheers everyone up. When Ramon informs Shevchenko about the repaired helicopter, Shevchenko reacts indifferently. That night, the crew uses the ship's limited power supply to play a game, prompting Ramon to scold them, reminding them of their precarious situation. One crew member suggests blowing up oil barrels in the ice to break it and escape. Ramon agrees, but Sevchenko refuses to give any orders, insisting on waiting for the ministry's instructions. Frustrated, the crew, led by Ramon, storms into Sevchenko's room. Seeing everyone together, Sevchenko becomes anxious. A crew member remarks that despite working on the ship for 5 years, this is the first time he's seen the captain's room. They lock Sevchenko in his room and assign the pilot to guard him with a flare gun. Meanwhile, the crew heads to the control room and orders Benny to start the ship's engines. Benny hesitates, asking if this order came from Sevchenko, but no one answers. Ramon gives the command to start the engines. Hearing the engines start, Sevchenko and Nikolai become alarmed, realizing that activating the engines could lead to a major crisis. The crew, thrilled by the working engines, rushes to the kitchen to eat, assuming they will soon find land. However, the chef denies them any food, insisting they save it for when they reach safety. This leads to a massive brawl in the kitchen. Meanwhile, other crew members take oil barrels and move them far from the ship onto the ice. They detonate the barrels, but the ice is too thick to break. During the explosion, the ship's doctor, who was a close friend of Sevchenko, dies. As per the doctor's wish, Sevchenko lays his body to rest in the water. On the other side, Luda discovers that if Nikolai and the crew aren't rescued within 3 days, the ministry's ship will arrive to save them. Back on the ship, a mute crew member signals everyone to come outside. The crew is shocked to see the iceberg dangerously close, threatening to collide with their ship at any moment. Nikolai refuses to give up and suggests steering the ship toward the iceberg to make a sharp turn at the last moment and escape. Surprisingly, Sevchenko supports the idea and takes the lead. From the helicopter, he guides the crew on the iceberg's location, and the crew cautiously steers the ship toward it. As the ship nears the iceberg, Nikolai orders full speed ahead. Part of the ship scrapes the iceberg, causing minor flooding, but the crew's strategy succeeds in avoiding a catastrophic collision. They leave the iceberg behind, celebrating their victory. However, the helicopter encounters technical issues, crashes into the water, and begins to sink. Sevchenko and the pilot are trapped inside, with chunks of ice falling onto the helicopter. The pilot escapes and risks his life to save Sevchenko, diving into the freezing water. The crew arrives in time and uses ropes to rescue both men. The man holding the ruby cup joyously throws it toward the iceberg, believing they no longer need it. Shortly after, the rescue team arrives, including Luda, who happily embraces Nikolai. She decides not to divorce him after witnessing his courage. Their ship sails away from the icy landscape toward the sunlight. A newspaper headline celebrates the heroic actions of Nikolai, Sevchenko, and the crew. The ministry's rescue ship is seen ahead, signifying their safety. With this, the movie ends.